Hey, people. Welcome back. Let's just jump into it. So, today I'll be talking about the fourth way, or it's a bit of a Gurdjieff concept. Who's Gurdjieff? Fourth way, what about the other three ways? So, if you're a fan of Western esotericism, you've probably come across the name, or maybe you've heard it mentioned in passing, the name Gurdjieff. And if you are a part of a Gurdjieff school, you've probably heard about a bunch of other names. Ouspensky, Maurice Nicole, maybe Rodney Collins. Usually, J.G. Bennett, Salzman, Orage, whatever. Probably pronouncing most of these wrong. But whatever. Basically, this is a branch of school, of esoteric school. So in the West, it's hard because there's not many esoteric, it's not, you're not going to turn the corner and find a building and it's like teaching ancient Pythagorean arts in a pure manner or something. So usually what you're going to find everywhere is Freemasonry, or maybe you'll find a Rosicrucian. And if you find a Rosicrucian school, it's usually a Mork, which they're kind of like the diet vanilla flavor of Rosicrucians. Like all other Rosicrucian schools I know of like dunk on a Mork, so whatever. But no offense if you're a part of a Mork, I'm sure you enjoy it and you get a lot out of it. But anyway, it's either that or it's theosophy. And theosophy, theosophy is good in the sense that it has a lot of substance. It gives a lot to its students, but it doesn't really have many methods. Like back in the day, there was an esoteric core of the Theosophical Society, and theosophists at large, maybe they practiced something like Raja Yoga, but nowadays especially, all theosophists do is they basically just read. They refine their mental intuition, and that's about it. I mean, some are still genuine seekers, and that's when they join other kind of schools, but in the end, it's a shell of what it once was. And so it's like, okay, what do you got? Rosicrucians, Theosophists. Well, there's a third option, which is funny because it's the fourth way. I mean, there's more options than that. I'm sure you can find Hermetic schools, or perhaps some of the better schools market themselves nowadays as Gnostic. But nonetheless, what is this Gurdjieff school? What is this Western school of Gurdjieff that we can find? What is it made up of? What does it teach? It's either called Gurdjieff's The Way or Gurdjieff's Work, or it's called the Fourth Way, which arguably apparently isn't a term that Gurdjieff used. Sometimes he used it in passing, but he didn't describe his work as that. It's more Ouspensky who took that moniker and advertised The Way as that. Who's Ouspensky? Ouspensky is Gurdjieff's probably greatest student. Some people dunk on Ouspensky. Personally, I think he's probably on a level with Gurdjieff himself. Ouspensky was an absolute genius who probably who probably did the minor path like pure intuition. If Ouspensky didn't join Gurdjieff, he would have become a famous Rosicrucian or a famous Theosophist. But nonetheless, so who's Gurdjieff? So this is, imagine, early 1900s. Some guy just appears in Russia and he says, hey, I've been to the East and I've got these secret teachings, baby. But unlike other people, they're actually good. So he's got this crazy, weird cosmology. And it's hard. A lot of people don't know where he got his stuff from, and he was a bit of a crazy wisdom master. So you'll find online people like trying to figure out the sources and stuff, and him at one point he says, I joined a brotherhood called the Samarong Brotherhood, and it's like the most mysterious place which no one knows where it is, and some people say he did stuff with Sufis, and some things he did stuff here, or he was in a Tibetan monastery. No one really knows. But nonetheless, we have his body of works, his teachings, and they're quite compelling. But one of his ideas especially is very interesting. The idea of the fourth way itself. So this is massive preamble to this concept. But there's this idea that a legitimate spiritual path will seek to move in a specific direction, will aim to go in a direction. But there are different paths that people can walk down depending on, say, temperaments. So And it's a legitimate spiritual path that actually aims, that actually moves you towards something, not just like, I don't know, you do a voodoo practice or something. I'm not sure, I don't know, maybe voodoo has some deep side where you actually connect with God, like at the end of it, but it's something that develops within you something. You yourself develop, you yourself become more than what you are. You have this chance to crystallize something greater. And so he says there are these three ways, and he calls them the fakir, the monk, and the yogi. And these aren't necessarily like, strict, like someone who's doing the way of the fakir, they all call themselves fakir or something. He basically breaks it up into body, emotion, and intellect or mind. So so the fakir, the word fakir is basically, when you think of like India and you think of a guy lying on a bed of nails, that's basically the concept of the fakir. It's in modern day parlance, it's kind of like a street magician or something. But basically, the fakirs as an actual esoteric tradition were somewhat basically they were these people who tried to overcome the physical body via physical means. They tried to have dominion over all of the corporeal body and all of its functions. So they would do crazy, like if you ever see like the Guinness Book of Records, and there's those guys that hold their arms up for like 26 years or something, and the arm just becomes like warped and just it like atrophies in that position. That's fakirism. And so a lot of people just like, a lot of fakirs do that kind of stuff, and they do other things as well, like roll between like two rivers or something, or like stand in a spot for like 6 months, no matter if it's raining or shining or if ants get on them or anything. They just stand in that spot without moving. But there's like a school of fakirism, and it's all about building willpower, and your willpower then having dominion completely over your physical body. And there's fakirs that can do like, they have almost like special powers, so they can actually resist pain. So like the bed of nails thing actually is a legitimate kind of thing. Or the I think one of the most famous ones is there was a fakir master who was able to stop his like body processes themselves. Like, so he got his students to bury him alive, and they put a reed in his mouth that just connected to like, basically, they buried him, so there's just this reed that's feeding him air, and he just stayed underground for like is it 6 months or 6 weeks? I don't want to say anything too exaggerated, but it was like, most people with just a reed in your mouth, just underground, I don't know how many people would last even an hour like that. This guy lasts, let's just say even a week is unbelievable. And like, so he basically, I don't know if they came and like dropped, maybe his students came and dropped like some water down there every so often to keep him refreshed or something like that, but it's unbelievable. And they basically pulled him out like after 6 weeks or 6 months, and kind of he just restarted his body processes and just went back to normal. And it's like, you hear stories like that and you go, whoa, it sounds exaggerated, but at the same time, someone who dedicates their life to that kind of mastery, you'd expect some kind of extraordinary manifestation. So that's the idea of the fakir. It's someone who moves on a spiritual path, but they do it in a completely physical, or not physical manner, but the willpower is developed. The willpower is developed, not necessarily the consciousness. Their will is developed via physical means. So you could say technically martial artists, or martial artists in more a spiritual vein, that's also the way of the fakir. Or you could use like the example of someone like David Goggins, if you know that guy. He's like that US Marine that does all the extreme kind of sports stuff. But you listen to his story, and he's got this weird story where he didn't train for a marathon. He just goes and runs a marathon or something. And it's like 100 miles, and they're doing just laps, and each lap is a mile. And so he gets to, he's basically dead. He's out of energy at lap 20, but he forces himself to and then at like lap 46, I think he's like just like completely like exhausted. He wants to sit down, but he knows if he sits, he won't get up. And so he gets to like lap 70 or something, 76. I'm like vaguely remembering this story, and I think he does have a break then. And then, because I think the toes on his feet are broken. It's something extreme, like really extreme. His sneakers, like his nipples are bleeding. He's got all this stuff wrong, and they like duct tape his feet or something, duct tape his toes, and then he gets up and he just forces himself through the extra like 30 laps. and he makes it all through like a zombie, just makes it through, gets to the end, and then he says he like goes to his plastic deck chair, sits down, and as he sits down he immediately shits his pants. And like his girlfriend at the time needed to like load him in the back of the van and drive him home and put him in the bath and clean him off. And he said just being there in the bath with like the hot water running over him after doing that, he said it was the greatest pleasure he had ever experienced. And I'm like, that's okay, that's interesting. But the thing that gets more interesting is he said he booked himself for another marathon like 2 weeks later. So 2 weeks later, it's like time for the marathon, and his mum had always also registered because it was like a one for charity or something. And so he was like, you know what, I'm just going to go and support my mum. So they go, and he like once again has to duct tape his feet because it's still got broken toes and stuff like that, and does all this stuff. And he gets there and he's like, you know, I've registered for this marathon. You know, I may as well just do it. I'll do it with my mum. I'll just lean on her and I'll walk it with her because she was like an old lady. So he was leaning on his mum, and he's there. He's all broken. There's no way he could do the marathon. And he says the gun shoots, like the starting pistol goes, and something just clicks in his head, and he starts running, and he just powers through, and he does it. And then he did something like 10 other marathons in that year or something. And it's like, what? Like this ultra marathon runner? And then he's done other things now. But basically, it's an interesting story because what does that mean? What is he all about? What basically, functionally, has conscious control over his adrenal glands. He can just give himself energy whenever. And I think people have said that who know him have like said that they've been working out with him, and when they're lifting weights, like doing bench press, they say like on the final the final set he does more benches than he did when he on the first set. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. So he's someone who kind of breaks the idea of like, he breaks concepts by his very mere existence. And so you have that guy, and then it's like, and it's interesting, what is he all about? When you hear him in interviews and stuff, he's all about talking about, you know, you have to defeat the voice in your mind, overcome that, you know, he calls it his inner bitch or something. No, actually, is that just Joe Rogan, defeat your inner bitch? But I think he has a similar thing. Him and Joe Rogan get along. So it's like you have to defeat the voice in your mind that says you can't do this. It's kind of like a Rocky thing in real life. The voice that says you can't do this, you got to stop. But no, and it intellectually, like, no, it's bad for you. You got to know. Like that voice, you have to just crush it. You just have to keep going and going and going. And you think it's like overtraining, you're going to kill yourself. But you look at like this guy, David Goggins, and he looks like he's 40 years old or something, and he looks like a 26-year-old. He's got the body of a 26-year-old. It's intense. Very interesting guy. Very interesting guy. He is someone who you could say, spiritually, internally, his being has grown. He has more willpower than now than when he entered this life. And how did he do it? He did it by pure physical means. He developed himself. He is functionally the way of the fakir. I'm not sure if he's ultra spiritual or anything, but but you know, so that's an example of the fakir. And then it's like, okay, so then you've got the monk, and this is something more. Now this is something that we can understand. The monk doesn't mean someone who's a monk. The monk merely means someone who follows a spiritual path, who goes down a spiritual path, but they go down it emotionally. They use their emotions. So usually these paths are paths of, you know, pure prayers, like reciting prayers continuously, kind of that come to like bhakti yoga, lots of devotion. People who do bhakti yoga are basically doing the way of the monk, or, you know, also actual monks as well. Like, you know, there's a very strong Christian layman tradition of monkism. But this path of the monk, what does it develop? It functionally develops the emotions. It refines them. It refines the emotional part of us, which is the part that can actually connect to something higher. So a lot of monks who are genuine, they have genuine experiences of God, which really is, you know, you could say their higher self, but that's something so massive that is, and basically our higher self is connected to God anyway, so they have this intimate experience with God, and they have a lot of mystical experiences. And yeah, there are some monks that are somewhat intellectual, or that can translate their their mystical experiences, but those are few and far between. The majority of people who have walked the path of the monk, we will never really know what they experienced because they never wrote them down. It was ineffable. They could not explain what they experienced. Their emotions they refined to a point, and those emotions connected to something higher. And they were just lifted up. So the way of the monk is very, in its extreme sense, it's very mystical. It's more like, you're developing something that connects you, and it's this thing here. This higher self, this thing here is developed, and it comes down and it pulls you up. You don't really have any roots in the way of the monk. Whereas the way of the yogi is more of an occult way. It's a way where you develop the lower self, you develop the mind. But you don't develop the mind, you don't make more elaborate concepts, you don't have you don't have a lot of theories. Nothing is born out of theories. You need something real. So what do yogis do? The way of the yogi, you could potentially put, and once again, this kind of gets confusing because, you have bhakti yoga, which is way of the monk, and then you can have like hatha yoga, which is the way of the fakir, and then you have like raja yoga, which is the way of the actual yogi. So you could actually say that like yoga synthesized, when you do true yoga, which it strikes man on all sides at the same time, could be classed as like a fourth way school. But nonetheless, there are some yogis, say like Jnana yoga, where it just develops the kind of like this conscious experience, or kind of an experience going upwards, like you're leading your mind out of duality. And then there's Raja Yoga itself, which also develops the chakras, has lots of breathing techniques, also develops concentration as well, and things like that. So it's like, that's the school of Raja Yoga. It's the development. It's not a development of the mind. Sorry, I keep saying that. It's a refinement of the mind, so that the mind can receive things. So this is where you awaken powers. All the rays of the mind are focused in such a way that certain centers or psychic organs in the body that have atrophied can be reactivated, and the personality itself can gain clairvoyance, can gain clairaudience, the occult ear. This is the way of the yogi. It's a much more conscious, directed way. And so in this way, once again, you have these kind of powers and whatnot, but you don't necessarily, you could say, finish the work, or there is something that is lopsided. You are lopsided fundamentally. You're not, there's something that you're not developing. Oh, look, Danny in the background's trying to get out. Too bad, little kitty. Anyway. So you could class, and this is where I kind of like look at people in the world, and I don't want to like, shit on people. But it's like, I'm more like worried for them. Like, there's that guy, Sticks Hexenhammer 666 or something. Great videos, great guy. But when I look at him, I see like the third category. I see he hasn't really developed his body. He's very intellectual. I doubt, he's got a relationship with a girl. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he's definitely not a monk. And so what's left then? Well, what's left is his huge intellectualism and occult practices. Clearly, he is more operational. He's more this third way. And in that sense, he's lopsided. I kind of remember, it reminds me of Nietzsche. In Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, there's a bit where Zarathustra, he comes upon a crowd of people, and they basically show him a dwarf and say, Zarathustra, you're a Superman. We have our own Superman. And they have this dwarf there. But the dwarf has like a giant ear. And so the ear is this weird symbol of the intellect. But when this happens, Nietzsche kind of exits the story and just starts going on off on, or maybe it's Zarathustra just hard book to read and comprehend, but he basically has this whole kind of tangent, goes on this whole tangent about how some men are actually disabled and they become one thing. So in a way, when someone is disabled, like they lose their sight and their ears, they're able to hear extraordinarily well, or someone who loses their hearing is able to see in an extraordinary manner. That's people perceive as, superior to them. These people consider them superhuman, but they're not. They're just lopsided. So in the same way that there are some people who are all ears or all eyes, there are some men who are all stomach or all feet or something like that. And so it's basically like, so he basically says that some people, they appear to be extraordinary, but they're just lopsided. They're imbalanced, actually. They're not the Superman. So when I look at people like Styx, or people who are very intelligent, who are in like public discourse or doing, especially in the occult scene, I kind of look at them and I'm like, number 3, third man. We got a third way here. We got a yogi. We got an occultist. Which, it's nothing wrong with that, but there's a certain danger there. So what does it mean to be the fourth way then? This is what Gurdjieff preached, to strike man on all sides. So this is the fourth way, where the center of gravity isn't in the body. The center of gravity isn't in your emotions, nor is the center of gravity in your intellect. Where is the center of gravity? To Gurdjieff, what he tried to design his teachings for is you place the center of gravity in the consciousness itself. So this is the fourth way, where the work is to, obviously, you try to do these different things and you try to balance yourself. You try to do all these 3 ways, in a sense, you synthesize them together. It's very similar to what Plato said. Plato, a real man can do, does 3 things. He's able to wrestle, he's a musician, he can play music, and he's also a philosopher. Men should do these 3 things. So it's like wrestling, body, music, emotion, and then philosophy, mind. So there's the balanced man. But then Gurdjieff went more than that and said, no, you need to have your center of gravity within the consciousness itself. So you have to develop the consciousness. And so Gurdjieff's techniques he uses are all about, once again, developing the consciousness. Yeah, he did body exercises and dances and things like that, and all these other things. But the main brunt of his teachings was about consciousness and awakening. You need to awaken. Because what's the aim? The aim is we want to be born. We want to be born, but not in this world. We want to be born in the other worlds. We want to be initiated and move into another world, become a denizen of the other world. So that is what it means to be born again. Truly what it means to be born again, not just you just change your belief system and all of a sudden you're changed. You've just changed your belief. You haven't restructured anything inside yourself. You're the same person. You've just slapped a sticker over yourself. No offense, Christians. But to be born, you have to die. And to die, you have to be awake. So death, you can die. I mean, technically you can die. You can do Way of the Monk. You can die without being awake. Yeah, go for it. But really, you should be awake to die. Because especially, the other thing about those 3 ways is those 3 ways require you to separate. To really make headway in those ways, you need to separate yourself from life. Most of those people do. Monks, yogis, fakirs, they separate themselves from life so that they have time and they're not distracted by anything. And so that their defects that they don't work on, the defects that they don't, or the part of them that's unbalanced, basically, doesn't tip them over the edge. So they're in a space where they can just develop themselves in one point and they can crystallize something like that. But once again, they're still lopsided. So to develop yourself on all sides, to a competent degree on all sides, but to have that center of gravity in the consciousness, to awaken the consciousness itself, to work via the consciousness itself. So how do you do this? Oh, hello, Danny. Get the fuck off of this table. How do you do this? He preached self-remembering and self-observation. So 2 different techniques, or 2 different things that have to be done at the same time. And it's said that it's actually impossible to do. There's like a contradiction. It's like it's impossible to do them at the same time. So what are they? How do you do that? Maybe this talk has gone on a little bit long, but I'll basically end it with this teaser. You need to self-remember and self-observe at the same time to truly awaken the consciousness, to truly be awake. You need to crystallize something in the consciousness. So your consciousness, your conscious state, something in it becomes automatic. So something becomes automatic, so there's an attribute you have in your consciousness itself, your awareness. It's like your waking state, how you move through the day. Your consciousness itself is sharpened, so you always have a type of clarity, or your awareness is always on a point all throughout the day. yes, you do get distracted, you do get fascinated, you do fall asleep, but there's a part of you that doesn't. That is what they're trying to achieve. So it's not just, you do develop willpower through emotions, through physical body, through mentalism, but you also develop consciousness. These two things go together. And through this awakening, you die, and through dying, you slowly become born. You slowly crystallize soul and move into another world. And all of this, to do all of this, really takes a third factor. It really takes sacrifice. You need to sacrifice. It's good to sacrifice to the world, like karma yoga. It's good to do that. It's good to be a good person. It's good to have an ethical foundation. But at the same time, the thing that you really sacrifice is parts of yourself. You're really sacrificing your old self to the new. You're sacrificing your desire, your passions, your appetites, and you're putting them on an altar, and you're sacrificing them to God, which in this case is your higher self, your being. So that person that you are now is not the person who's going to become immortal. Is not the person who's going to immortalize. What you are now is a chrysalis. Your personality is just a chrysalis, but there's something behind your personality that you're developing. And when that finally cracks and breaks and fades away, your true self, what really matters, what's really perpetual, what is good, will perpetuate through time, through space, through eternity. And what's wrong, and really it's like, oh, well, I'm going to lose myself. No, what's going to be lost is all the crap, is your anxieties, is your depressions, your paranoias, once again, everything that holds you back, your chains. Who doesn't want to be unchained? So to be unchained, you first have to chain yourself. You got to put some weight on and then lift it. And the resistance, the fighting against this, the friction actually gives you this strength. So sacrifice. So you have to learn to sacrifice. And this is very difficult, because the ultimate sacrifice in a sense is, you could say, things like when someone insults you, holding your tongue. So it's very interesting, because that's almost a Christic thing. You know, when someone slaps you, you turn the other cheek. What that mystery is, that Christic mystery, is actually a form of transmutation. It's not to be passive and be a simp or a cuck and just stay like flaccid and let people run over you. It means to not be reactionary. When someone slaps you, you don't just punch them in the face. I mean, you first find stillness, and then you do what's appropriate in that situation. Usually I think in that situation, it's like he says turn the other cheek, because that's something so extraordinary to those people back then. It's like, if someone slaps you and you turn the other cheek, it would almost be a shock to that person, because no one would do that. That's what he really means. What you do should, in a sense, be shocking to other people. And this is where the insanity, is he an insane madman, or is he an enlightened master? Is he, a true legitimate spiritual teacher, or is he a rogue, a sly man, someone who's just deceiving you? You can't really tell. Unless you begin to develop yourself on the path, unless you begin to awaken, you then really understand what's, a legitimate teacher and what's a legitimate path. And slowly, slowly, you begin to walk that path, whichever one's right for you. In the end, the fourth way is the best way. And this is one of the best things about Gurdjieff's teachings, and why I would say, maybe you can find a Gurdjieff school that's good, but I mean, they have their own problems. The best thing about the teachings is you can get those teachings and you can graft them onto whatever you're doing. So if you're into Hindu yogoism, you can read Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and their teachings just sync up perfectly. Or if you're into Taoism and internal alchemy, those teachings sync up. If you're into Hermetics, Neoplatonic, Neo-Pythagorean, ceremonial magic, you can read Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and the teachings sync up, or not sync up even, perfectly complement. These fourth way teachings of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky perfectly complement whatever other spiritual path, or whatever mystical path, or whatever occult path you yourself are walking down. It's perfect. It's quite fantastic what he's done. But anyway, that's a cornerstone idea, the fourth way. I've rambled a bit much. If you want to hear more about the fourth way, I know, or if you know someone who's into the fourth way, send them this video, and we'll see how they like it. But anyway, hope you got something out of that. Goodbye. I'll see you next week. See you next week.